Growing up as a Nintendo kid, I take no pleasure in crapping on the Genesis. No pleasure at all. None whatsoever.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
But Sega soldiers, you have to acknowledge that your system has just as much trash as the rest of ours. I might not have grown up with a Sega system, but being old and dusty with actual income now, I was able to catch up to catch the whiff of the following games. Side note, no Shaq Fu, Rise of the Robots, or Action 52 on this video. They very well may deserve to be on this list, but I've talked about them before, and technically, the Genesis versions are superior to the other ones. In no particular order, here are 10 of the worst Genesis games. Wayne's World was released in 1993 for the Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, Nintendo, DOS, and the Game Boy by THQ and Grey Matter. This game is kinda sorta based upon the 1992 film, which was based upon the classic SNL skits. As opposed to a lot of movies based upon Saturday Night Live skits, Wayne's World was actually pretty good. Too bad that couldn't be extended to the video games. You control Wayne, as he and Garth are sucked into a video game at the arcade. Garth gets kidnapped by a gelatinous cube, and Wayne must travel across 4 levels to find his buddy and get out alive. This is a tall task, as everything is out to get him, including inanimate instruments. You can jump, rock so hard you shoot a projectile, and use any item you pick up, but you start out with 5 hits and 5 lives, and trust me, they will drain fast. Wayne gets attacked by sentient mixtape equipment, and every time he gets hit, he has to say, "Not." This is amusing the first time, and turns into rip your ears off irritating the next 100. The voice lines in general are actually really good quality, but they never shut the heck up. The jumping is clunky, you'll fail to see some of the dangers as the graphics blend in the stuff you need to avoid, and you have to start over at the start of each level each time you die. It's infuriating. The levels are structured after locations in the movie, after they've been shredded into hell, into multiple vertical platforms, and it is all too easy to get lost. I wouldn't be surprised if people got stuck in the first level and just said screw it, because the gameplay doesn't back up the frustration you'll go through just trying to play it. Oh yeah! Strider was an awesome hack and slash platformer in the arcades. Strider Hear You was awesome to control, and him slashing his sword through the different types of mechanical horrors that oppose him was super satisfying. Strider Returns takes that formula and absolutely ruins it and lands it on this list. Journey from Darkness, Strider Returns, was released in 1992 for the Genesis and Master System by US Gold. This game is technically a port from a 1990 release on Amiga and other consoles that was released in Europe. If you are confused and are asking, didn't Capcom develop the first one? You would be correct. US Gold handled the porting of Strider in European markets and commissioned their own sequel to the series, with Capcom's half-hearted permission. Capcom themselves would make a Strider 2 in 1999, and it completely ignores the existence of this game for good reason. Strider, nicknamed Hinjo in this version for some reason, gets nerfed hard. He moves so much slower than the original and is less mobile overall. You can still swing your sword from a distance away, but is it me, or is this not nearly as satisfying sounding? You get the ability to throw shurikens in this version, as opposed to a gun in the original European release, but overall, that's the bare minimum advancement you'll get here. Strider Returns is overall a disappointing step backwards for this series, with which what we know now makes sense, but back in the day upon release, people probably thought the Strider series had fallen off or something. Good thing this didn't stick, as not having Strider Hear You in Marvel vs. Capcom 2 would make future Dre sad. Everyone run! It's environmental propaganda coming for you! Awesome Possum Kicks Dr. Machino's Butt was released for the Genesis in 1993 by Tengen. Another mascot platformer released during the age where they were everywhere. You control Awesome Possum, the tubular dude working to save the environment, picking up one thing of pollution at a time. Dr. Machino is a nerd whose whole goal is to send his robots to pollute the earth, and it's up to you to stop it. You run throughout each level Sonic the Hedgehog style, not even joking. The momentum resembles Sonic something heavy, picking up cans and bottles and destroying robots to save the trees. In between levels, you both get bonus levels and environmental quizzes that test how much of an environmental ally you are. Get it wrong, and the council of animals will eat you. Now, all of this sounds good, But is it fun to play? No, not even fun to look at. The graphics are especially eye-straining, with the sprites blurring into each other and obstacles coming out of nowhere because 1, how ugly the game looks, and 2, how fast Awesome Possum will run right into traps. The sounds aren't much better, as each bleep bloop song and sound effect grates more and more on your nerves the more you play on. Add in the game being able to talk to you over and over again, and a fun little side addition turns into full-on cheese grater to the eardrums. All of this combines with the preachy environmental message to turn into an overall unpleasant experience that won't motivate you to help the environment, instead, probably inspiring you to throw empty cans into a river. Please don't do that. You'll make the turtles cry. Dark Castle was released in 1991 for the Genesis by Silicon Beach Software after being ported from the Mac and released on various platforms over the years. A platforming game, you control Prince Duncan as he is on the hunt for the Black Knight to protect his townspeople by running around the Black Knight's castle willy-nilly. Okay then. You are given the choice of 4 paths that each lead to a different set of levels, with Duncan running and jumping around the various obstacles. He can defend himself with rocks, but otherwise, the only other thing you can do is avoid enemies and traps alike. Platforming is especially tedious in this game, with Duncan always jumping a little too far or running right into what is probably a trap that will cost you a life. He can also get disoriented by walking into walls or falling short distances, which will probably cause death as you can't get hit by anything around the castle. You only get a set amount of lives, which, once they're gone, whoops, gotta start back at the castle entrance. While the original was lauded on the Mac, this version is almost an insult with how unfair it feels. The difficulty in finding out what to do to make it across each screen will drive you insane, and each time you die to the controls, you'll lose a little more sanity till you decide enough is enough and shut the game off for good. Honestly, other similar games on the platform do this concept much better than Dark Castle, so go seek those out and avoid this. American Gladiators was released in 1992 for the Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, Amiga, and DOS by GameTech. This game was originally released for the NES in 1991, but the Genesis version deserves special mention for being the worst one out of the bunch. Based upon the game show from 1989, you control a contestant as they go through multiple events of the TV show against either a computer-controlled opponent or a human, and whoever has the most points by the end wins. And that's it. Really. That's all the game is. You can do a short tournament mode, but essentially that's the whole game. Well, does the individual events salvage value for this? Kinda. You have 6 events throughout the entire game, including Joust, Assault, Powerball, Atlas Spear, The Wall, and the Eliminator, and they all perform decently well on the platform. Powerball and Atlas Spear with the individual nature can be kinda janky with the scoring placement, and Assault, Joust, and Eliminator have confusing ass controls. But the games are indeed games. But is this all you really want? Playing these 6 mini games over and over again and calling it a day? The kids that received this probably weren't pleased with the experience being over in less than 30 minutes, and you'll probably not be satisfied either. Now, why is the Genesis post on the worst list? Well, quite easily actually. It features 1 less event than the other consoles. Yep, Human Cannonball, as minor as the game is actually missing from the Genesis version that the others actually feature on their platform. While it's not a massive loss, it's still enough to add this game to the worst on the console. The original Highl was an action RPG released on the NES that, despite its interesting ideas, didn't particularly land well, besides on multiple lists of awful NES games. So Super Highl wasn't exactly starting off on the best foot, but despite the adversity, Super Highl dropped confidently and immediately crapped the bed and pissed in it for good measure. Super Highl was released on the Genesis in 1989 by T&E Soft, being ported originally from the MSX, which was released in 1989. Now, Super Highl includes a lot of cool additions. You can choose what character type you want to use in the beginning. There's a day-night cycle, a morality mechanic, and other really nifty additions. If these were in a better game, it would probably be applauded. Instead, it's wasted on this pixel nightmare. The game is hard to look at, and the sounds accompanying it doesn't help its case. This being an action RPG, you would expect some simple mechanics accompanying gameplay, but when it's hard to tell what your character is doing, you probably aren't gonna have a good time. But oh well, you try to do the normal RPG thing of buying equipment and fight some battles, and why am I so slow? Right, an encumbrance mechanic. You know what also surrounds that mechanic? Hunger. Don't eat rations for a long period and you will die. Stay up too late into the night? That affects you too. Honestly, everything will affect you and frustrate you till you don't even want to touch the controller for fear of death. That's the magic of a particularly bad game. Sword of Sodan was released in 1990 for the Sega Genesis by Enterprise Software and Electronic Arts. Initially released in 1988 on the Amiga, Sword of Sodan is a hack and slash in the loosest sense. You control either of two characters and walk your way to the right with enemies spawning on either side. You can't avoid them, so all you can do is swing your sword and oh my god, what is happening? The different buttons cause different swings of your sword, but trying to figure out what will hit enemies will drive you crazy. There's supposed to be different swings and stabs that affect enemies differently, but honestly, you'll probably stick with the overhead swing and nothing else. Bad guys will do the annoying shuffle in and out of your hit zone while gradually poking you for damage. And if they surround you, oh, you'll feel it in the lives column. Enemies will drop potions that do a variety of things that you must pause the game to use. And honestly, the combining mechanic is actually pretty cool, but the base gameplay is not. The slow pace of the player character combined with the confusion of actually fighting makes this game not fun to play. The blood effects are pretty cool though. Caliber 50 was released in 1991 for the Sega Genesis by the Visco Corporation. A port from the original 1989 vertical scrolling shooter in the arcade. You control an army captain as he runs across various screens, shooting all the enemies he comes across and saving his fellow captured men. America! USA! USA! You can shoot in all directions and pick up additional weapons, as well as commandeer vehicles in your quest to bring freedom to this freedomless land. Compared to the arcade, this game is ugly, but that's nothing new for arcade ports. It's just something kids had to grasp in the time. But the ugliness is only the first blotch on the many that befalls this game. The controls are really awkward, with buttons dedicated to turn clockwise or counterclockwise, which will cause you to fire in the wrong direction quite often. The enemies can down you in one hit, but trying to be careful with these button combinations seems like an oxymoron. The sounds are also very unpleasant, and all of this lead to a game that falls far apart from its arcade success on the Genesis platform. Ikari Warriors, this is not. The Last Battle, Legend of the Final Hero, was released on the Genesis in 1989 by Sega and further ported to the Amiga and Commodore. A side-scrolling beat-em-up, you control Arzark as he makes his way across the stage, attacking all the enemies that come into his view. Each level is composed of multiple stages that the player themselves can choose the path on, which can all range from standard beat-em-up stages, maze stages where you have to find your way out of each level, and boss encounters where you'll most likely die. As Arzark defeats enemies, he will fill a gauge at the bottom of the screen that, when full, will cause him to go beast mode and be able to punch at the speed of sound, while making very familiar noises. If this sounds like Kenshiro from the Fist of the North Star series, you would be correct. The original game in Japan was Fist of the North Star, the new legend of the post-apocalyptic messiah, and featured characters from the original series. Because the international version didn't retain the license, the graphics and characters were altered outside of Japan, sapping it of one of its only features. Even with it, this game is bad. Ironically enough, this was one of the initial Genesis games released in the US, and it does nothing to show off the capabilities besides the slightly better graphics that have also been nerfed by having the violence and blood censored. The gameplay is monotonous, the controls are a little wonky, and it's overly difficult to get through with no continues, saving you along the way. Just bypass this one, it's already dead. And to finish this list up, we have another Waldo video game that grips its way onto people's shelves without bringing with it the charm of the original source. The Great Waldo Search was released in 1992 on the Genesis, Nintendo, and Super Nintendo by Toy Headquarters. Like the original source, you are trying to find Waldo and other things amongst the crowded pages of each level. Waldo, his dog, a scroll, various clocks that extend the time limit, and points are scattered throughout each scenario with various animated sprites obscuring your view. Once you find Waldo in the scroll, the level is over and you can move on to the next. Finding Waldo's dog, Wolf, will trigger a short minigame where you collect bones for extra points, but otherwise does nothing special. While this game looks a lot more visually busy and impressive than the previous Where's Waldo on the NES, it unfortunately falls flat for a variety of reasons. For one, there's only 5 levels, meaning this game can be completed literally under 20 minutes. The other, Waldo ironically sticks out like a sore thumb during all of the levels, whether normal or expert difficulty. The fun in a Where's Waldo picture is having to scour the various aspects to catch a glimpse of him amongst the occupants, but this game doesn't quite have the satisfying feeling of finding him. Yes, finding the scroll is a little harder, but not that much to justify spending money on this game. If I received this game as a kid, I would have been pissed and thrown a fit. Not really, as I'd probably get my head caved in because my mother did not play those games. Have any other games that deserve to be on this list? Leave them in the comments below. Hope to see you again real soon.